Did the import of 5 red heifers from Texas contribute to the attacks on October 7th? And a story that I almost missed. We're going to talk about that today from Jerusalem. Okay, welcome to Jerusalem, everyone. I am Callie Mitchell, and this is I Will Not Keep Silent. A few weeks ago, my sister actually asked me if I knew anything about the possibility of red heifers being sacrificed before Passover. And I told her that I knew that the red heifers had arrived, but I hadn't heard anything about the possibility of them actually being sacrificed this soon. But because she asked, I thought the right thing to do was to go back and check it out and see what was going on. And I'm so glad that I did, because I almost missed this huge story that happened back midway through January at the 100-day mark of the war. The Palestine Chronicle released a speech from Abu Obadiah, the Hamas spokesman, in which he stated a few reasons why they decided to embark on Al-Aqsa flood, which was the October 7th massacre. And of the reasons listed, he discussed red cows. Let's see exactly what he said. He says, "We look back 100 days to remember the educated, the complicit, and the incapacitated among the world powers, governed by the law of the jungle, reminding them of an aggression that reached its peak against our path, Al-Quds, and Al-Aqsa, with the start of its actual temporal and spatial division and the bringing of the red cows as an application of detestable religious myth designed for aggression against the feelings of an entire nation at the heart of its Arab identity and the path of its prophet, the night journey and ascension to heaven." Okay, the red cows that he's talking about there are, in fact, the 5 red heifers that were brought to Israel back in September of 2022. So this is an actual real story that actually happened. This isn't something sensational and made up, but we really literally did have 5 kosher for temple sacrifice red heifers arrive in Israel via Texas over a year ago. And they are reaching the correct age to sacrifice just before Passover this year. So why are the red heifers significant? To begin with, they are essential in order for temple sacrifice to actually happen. In Israel, they could build the temple, but without the ceremony involving the red heifers, they can't actually participate in any sacrifices or rituals in the temple. So their presence in Israel marks a big step forward in the temple being able to be built and for it to be operational. And that, of course, is a threat to our Arab neighbors. They have been fighting Israel building the temple since before the state was founded. This is what the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem told them would happen in time if they did not fight the Jewish people. So this has been part of the battle that we have had with our Arab neighbors since before the state was formed. Now, if you remember, the massacre on October 7th was called Al-Aqsa flood by the Arab people. And that's because they were going to battle for Al-Aqsa Mosque and Temple Mount as a whole. Al-Aqsa Mosque is actually the black domed mosque on Temple Mount, but Al-Aqsa can refer to the entire Temple Mount complex. And their plans were not only just to attack the towns in the south, but they had planned to take this massacre all the way up to Jerusalem to Al-Aqsa Mosque. Fortunately, they didn't succeed in those plans, even though what they did accomplish was just beyond imaginable. Before we get into the story of how the heifers arrived in Israel, where are they, how are they doing, what are they doing, I thought it would be good to just start with scripture and look at what the Bible says about the role that the red heifers played in temple worship. So if you have your Bible, open it up to Numbers 19 and let's read together. "Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, 'This is the statute of the law that the Lord has commanded. Tell the people of Israel to bring you a red heifer without defect, in which there is no blemish, and on which a yoke has never come. And you shall give it to Eleazar the priest, and it shall be taken outside the camp and slaughtered before him. And Eleazar the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger and sprinkle some of its blood toward the front of the tent of meeting 7 times. And the heifer shall be burned in his sight. Its skin, its flesh, and its blood with its dung shall be burned. And the priest shall take the cedar wood and the hyssop and the scarlet yarn and throw them into the fire, burning the heifer. Then the priest shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterward he may come into the camp. But the priest shall be unclean until evening. The one who burns the heifer shall wash his clothes in water and bathe his body in water, and shall be unclean until evening. And a man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and deposit them outside the camp in a clean place, and they shall be kept for the water for impurity for the congregation of the people of Israel. It is a sin offering, and the one who gathers the ashes of the heifer shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. And this shall be a perpetual statute for the people of Israel and for the stranger who sojourns among them. Now, the next passage goes on to explain what happens after they make the ash water and how they sprinkle it on the people to ritually cleanse them from coming in contact with the dead. But this process is essential. It happens outside of the camp and with a very special red heifer that is blemish-free. And according to the rabbinic tradition, it cannot have more than 2 white or black hairs. It has to be in its 3rd year of life, so age 2 plus a month and older. And it can have never been impregnated and calved. It can never have worn a yoke, can never have done any type of strenuous work. So the odds statistically that I've seen of finding a red heifer that meets this criteria is actually 1 in 50,000. Now, through the course of history, there have actually been 9 red heifers used for this ceremony, beginning with Moses, up until the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. The Rambam, also known as Maimonides, who was a 12th century Jewish sage, he has been known to have said that the ceremony of the 10th red heifer would bring in the Messianic age. So if you can imagine, within the religious Jewish community, there's been a lot of anticipation about the possibility of finding this 10th red heifer. In the time that I've lived here in Israel, there have been red heifers that have appeared on the scene. There was one born here years ago, and soon after it was born, it was determined to be unkosher for the ceremony. So the Temple Institute connected with a ministry called Boneh Israel, which is a Christian-run ministry that supports the religious Jewish community, and they asked that they help them find a suitable red heifer for this ceremony. Boneh Israel is run by a Texan named Byron Stinson, and he took it upon himself to painstakingly find a heifer for these rabbis. Oh, speaking of heifer, how did you get here? I thought you were supposed to be in ancient Shiloh. Go on. That doesn't happen every day. Okay, so Byron, what he did in order to find the heifers is that he took out ads in agricultural and livestock-oriented magazines saying that they were looking for heifers and was looking for farmers to respond. And through the grapevine, he found various different farms that were raising red cows, and he would go out and meet with them. Now, the problem that they were facing in the United States is that the cattle there, their ears are tagged soon after birth. And as soon as the cattle's ear is tagged, then it's no longer blemish-free. That counts as a blemish, so it's automatically disqualified from being used. So Byron found one farm where something happened, and it was during the time of COVID, and the employee who tags ears didn't show up for work, and he had a few heifers that were tag-free. And so they examined that, and at least one, I believe, came from this man's farm. And then they found another farm that was run by 2 brothers, and this one has a really amazing story, actually. This farm is run by Brian and Ty Davenport, and Ty Davenport happens to be a veterinarian, and Brian Davenport is in the diamond industry. So put a pin in that note because we're going to come back to it. Now, Ty's story is really unique in that he actually rededicated his life back to the Lord in the 1990s. And that was around the time when his family was deciding that they wanted to get into livestock and start breeding cattle. And he decided that maybe they should do red cows because there were red cows in the Bible. There were red heifers in the Bible, and they were used for the temple. I heard this story and I totally got it because you all know I have a Sheltie sheepdog, and part of my interest in her was having the object lesson of a shepherd in our home. And I'm also growing a grapevine because I wanted the object lesson of a grapevine in our home. So I totally got looking at cow possibilities and being like, hey, let's do the red ones. So little did they know that this was going to have a bigger outcome than they expected, because 30 years later, their farm is one of the ones that 4 of the cattle were selected from to be brought into Israel. Now, the way that this happened is that they initially sent a few rabbis out to the farms from the Dallas area to check on the cattle and see if they met some initial requirements. And then the Temple Institute sent 2 rabbis, Rabbi Saki and Rabbi Hanan, from Israel all the way to Texas to examine them. And so they had this giant mob, basically, of rabbis on their farm looking at the cattle and checking to see if any of them were suitable. And they ended up choosing a few who had just been born a few days earlier. And then came the unique situation of having to get the cattle over to Israel, because this needed to happen before they were 1 year old, but they couldn't be weaned until they were 5 months old. So they had to wait some time, and then they had to do so many different logistics that we're not going to get into right now in order to bring them over. But they did successfully arrive in Israel, and they were first housed up in Beit Sha'an, and now they are in ancient Shiloh, where there is a visitor site regarding the ancient tabernacle and its location. So tourists are able to see but not touch the 5 red heifers that are on the property. Okay, so I told you to put a pin in the story about Brian Davenport being a diamond dealer, right? Okay, now, this is why this is important. In the Midrash, there is a story about the purchase of one of the 9 heifers from history, and it actually came from a jewel dealer named Dama, and he was a Gentile. So what happened in this situation is that one of the gemstones fell out of the breastplate for the priest, and a group of rabbis approached this jeweler to make a purchase of a stone to replace it. And when they arrived, the jeweler was actually sleeping, and they were in communication with his son. They gave him a low price first, and the son said, my father's asleep, I'm not going to wake him up. And they kept going up higher and higher in their offer to try to get the son to wake up the father and go get the stone. But he wanted to honor his father and let him sleep. So when the father finally did wake up, he spoke to his father about their need. They were able to purchase the stone from him, and they offered him the same high price that they had last landed on. And the jeweler said, no, I'm going to give it to you for the low price. It's not your fault, I was sleeping, basically. So they blessed him for his righteousness and said that he would be blessed for what he had done. And a little while later, they went back to his farm and they purchased a red heifer from his farm that ended up being the heifer used in one of those 9 ceremonies. So, of course, if you know anything about the Jewish people, my mentor, Eliyahu Ben Haim from Intercessors for Israel, he used to always say from 1 Corinthians 1:22, the Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom. And so, of course, this is a really amazing sign that was continuing to build anticipation in the religious community, just to see the parallel that one of the 9 cows in the past was bought from a jewel dealer, and this group of 5, 4 of them came from a diamond dealer's farm today. Okay, so the last update I heard, one of the 5 cows actually has developed some white hairs in its tail, so it's technically not kosher at the moment. They said it's possible that it could return back to a kosher status later, but for now it's not blemish-free and not able to be used. But the other 4 are still looking good. I don't know what's going to happen. You know, we have to wait until Passover to see if this goes through or not. I really don't know. But I did want to take a few minutes just to look a little bit at what the New Testament says about the red heifer. So let's go to the book of Hebrews and read a little bit together. Hebrews 9:11 through 14. But when Messiah appeared as a high priest of the good things that have come, then through the greater and more perfect tent, not made with hands, that is, not of this creation, he entered once and for all into the holy places, not by means of the blood of goats and calves, but by means of his own blood, thus securing an eternal redemption. For if the blood of goats and bulls and the sprinkling of the defiled person with the ashes of a heifer sanctify for the purification of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Messiah, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, purify our conscience from dead works to serve the living God. In the New Testament, we see that the ceremony regarding the red heifer is a type and a shadow of things to come when Messiah Yeshua laid down his life to mediate the Jeremiah 31 new covenant for all of us for all time. What's interesting about the ceremony for the red heifer is that the sacrifice did not take place inside the temple. It took place outside the walls of the city. Let's also look at Hebrews 13:11 through 12. For the body of those animals whose blood is brought into the holy place by the high priest as a sacrifice for sin are burned outside the camp. So Yeshua also suffered outside the gate in order to sanctify the people through his own blood. Now we know that Messiah Yeshua was crucified on the cross outside the walls of the whole old city, similar to how that red heifer is sacrificed outside the walls of the camp. And not only that, but he was blemish free. So he fulfilled the requirement for the red heifer, not only cleansing us from exposure to the dead, but cleansing us from dead works so that we might serve the living God according to his word. Now, some of my Christian audience might be wondering if the rebuilding of the temple is a good thing, a bad thing, or somewhere in between. And the reason for that is because depending on your eschatology, and this is the eschatology that I personally hold, the anti-Messiah, the Antichrist, will one day take his seat in the throne of the temple and exalt himself against God. And we get that from Daniel 9:27, from Matthew 24, and from 2 Thessalonians 2. But something that I wanted to point out about this is that nowhere in the Bible does it call the temple of the Antichrist. Everywhere in the Bible, it is referred to as the temple of God, and what happens with the Antichrist is a sin of the Antichrist. So, without going into a lot of detail, I do think that as believers, when we see biblical prophecy being fulfilled or moving towards fulfillment, I think there's always a measure of rejoice that we can have in our heart. Now, I do want to swing back to the beginning, though. If you remember, we started this whole discussion by me showing you how the Hamas spokesman said that part of the reason that they launched the October 7th attacks was because the red heifers were brought into Israel. That is no small statement and something that we should also take very seriously. If you followed my videos early on after the war started, I reminded those of you who are really prophecy watchers just to remember that as the word of the Lord unfolds in real time, there are actually real people travailing to bring it about. And this is a great example. Now, this story might be new to some of you. Honestly, I don't think the average Israeli here in Israel knows much about the cows arriving. It didn't make the mainstream media. This is a story that was only covered on platforms that are read by the religious community and evangelical Christians. So I seriously doubt if you were to walk down the street in Jerusalem and you were to say, hey, what do you think about the red heifers being here? I don't even know that most of my neighbors would be aware that they're here. But there were some believers in the United States who were just over the moon thrilled to be seeing prophecy fulfilled in their day. And I totally get it. I understand it. But if we go back to that initial quote that I shared with you all, I think we need to be a little bit sober-minded and just remember that as prophecy is fulfilled here in Israel, the people of Israel do suffer and pay a price for it. So just please continue to pray for Israel. When you see things happen that really do look like the word of the Lord coming about, please get on your knees and just really pray for Israel. Pray for the protection of the people and pray for them to be strengthened by the Lord, because it is no small thing. I mean, what happened on October 7th was really serious, and by the mouth of the own, Hamas's own spokesman, it was related to these cows entering into Israel and all that meant for the possibility of the temple being rebuilt and temple worship happening there. It's not a small thing. Okay, so if this was interesting to you and you have more questions, please leave me comments below. Again, this is actually happening. This isn't, something sensational. This isn't something speculative. Like, this is happening. We have 5 red heifers here, 4 of which meet qualifications for this particular ceremony. So if you have questions, let me know. And also, let me know what you think. Like, should I... if they do the ceremony, should I try to go, or do you think that would be too dangerous? Let me know. What would you do? Okay, well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you all so much for your love and support for Israel, for Zion's sake. Please do not keep silent. See you next time.